Hi, and welcome to the React Show. Today's show is a conversation I had a couple days ago where we discussed how to successfully start projects with a person that's been doing it for many years. I had a lot of fun, and I feel like I learned a lot too, and I hope you do as well. So we didn't actually plan this when scheduling the recording, but it turned out to be the day they were actually doing a launch for their startup. So that was a lot of fun to talk with them about that. And we didn't really discuss this until the end of the show, but I did want to mention up front that I have included links to what we discussed. All right, and now, creator of the popular JavaScript and React library Slate.yjs, and now startup co-founder of meier.sh. Welcome to the React Show, Eric Meier. So thank you. Welcome to the show. How are you doing, Eric?
Doing great. Exciting day today. But yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be on the show.
Awesome. Well, super excited to have you. And so why is today such an exciting day for you?
We are launching the public waitlist for meier.sh. Actually, publicly committing to what we're doing because we've been in stealth for the past 1.5 months now. So yeah, it's gonna be exciting to see the reactions. Particularly also parts of my family don't even know what I'm working on, so they're gonna see that for the first time as well. So yeah.
Wow, that's really exciting. So what I wanted to sort of get into with you is how did you actually get started with meier.sh? And maybe before that even, just a quick overview. What is meier.sh? What is it that you've been working on?
Okay, you can kind of think of meier.sh like Mid-Journey, but with your face and your friend's face. So it's like an app where you have a very smooth onboarding experience. You just take a few selfies. We custom train a model to your face, and you have a Mid-Journey prompting system where you can just tag yourself and your friends and describe a situation, and we will generate realistic or essentially photos in any style of you and your friends. And it's very shareable and very fun to use. So yeah.
Wow, that sounds interesting. I'm looking forward to checking it out. So you said that this is sort of soft launching today. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, we're launching the waitlist and then slowly inviting people. It's still in the App Store review, so we can't actually public launch yet. We need your email to add you to the test flight. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have been in that situation many times. It can be quite frustrating. Yeah, that App Store, man, that thing could get you.
Yeah, it's like launching a website. You can do it in a day and you're done. And App Store, you have to do 3 cycles, especially if you start doing selfies. Then they get very, very particular about the wording and how everything has to look like. So yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine you have that aspect of it. You have the App Store aspect. And I guess to be specific, you're referring to the Apple App Store in this case?
Yeah. We're going to launch on well, but yeah, not in the beginning.
Yeah. And in my experience, Apple is way more particular about basically everything than Google. Yeah. So I'm curious, how did you actually get started with this project? Where did the idea come from?
So yeah, we started actually we found and we decided to pivot later on. It was a very interesting process to come. I find always coming up with project ideas or actually good project ideas is quite hard. People say ideas are cheap. I don't know if that's really the case. We spent 1.5 weeks just thinking about ideas, looking at what spaces we're good in and what we could potentially build. Came up with one idea that didn't end up being particularly a nice fit for him. So we actually pivoted to have something that's more exciting for both of us. And that's how we ended up with meier.sh. But we haven't looked back. Since we came up with that idea, it's been really, really fun to work on. It's an incredibly addicting app to use. So it's going to be really fun. But
yeah, it sounds like it. that whole thing you mentioned about like ideas being cheap, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
thing that people say, but I actually completely agree with you. And I would almost, the way I think of it now is like ideas might be cheap, but are
Yeah.
good ideas cheap? like everyone has an idea. Like I can't tell you how many times somebody's come up to me when they find out I know how to program, and they're like, "Oh, can you like I have this idea for this app," and and you're just like, sure." Right? Have you had that experience?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I feel like the like big problem with that is like most idea you come up with tend to be in like spaces you aren't that familiar with, and ideas in spaces that you aren't really familiar with like all sound great. So it's like, yeah, that's an amazing idea, like you should build it. But if you actually know the background in that space, like there's 95% is like a reason why that's like actually a bad idea, and like probably not something that like will work in the long term. I guess it's a bit different for like hobby projects and stuff like that, because in the end it doesn't really matter that much what you're working on. It's more like, is it fun to build? Like, will it teach me something? Yeah, if you get into like startup ideas, that's like a whole different story. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think you really sort of hit the nail on the head there. Like it's seems to be pretty easy to come up with ideas for something you're not familiar with. And I don't know how you respond to people that, do that. But for me, I've started being like, if somebody comes to me with some idea like that, I'll be like, well, have you talked to anyone in that industry? Have you worked in that industry? Have you, like, can you go shadow someone doing that and then come back to me and find, is that really a good idea? Like do you tell people something similar, or have you had that thought?
Oh yeah, definitely. And the thing is, like, most people also come up with the same ideas. Like most ideas aren't like
Yeah.
unique. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
like I don't know, 10 minutes of research probably would have shown you why that particular app or website isn't a great idea. But yeah.
Yeah. But I think then we're sort of straying into the danger of like discouraging someone that has the capability of building something from actually building it, right? Because I think that's the flip side of that coin is um, like I've been in situations where like it's sort of like idea paralysis or something, and I don't actually do anything. All I do is like plan out ideas or think about ideas or mess around with them, but I never actually pulled the trigger. Have you had that experience?
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially like with like side projects where you like don't really have that much pressure to commit. That like definitely happens. The good thing I think about, if you like just start building something, even if it's like a bad idea, you usually come up with a good idea along the way. And actually,
Yep.
like if you, it's like funny because like the startup I worked at before, like that's how they came up with their idea. They started building like a collaborative video editing tool, which turns out was like not a great idea at the time in the browser because of like technical limitations and stuff like that. But they like learned how hard it actually is to build collaborative softwares, like what a huge pain it is to do the hosting and stuff around that. So they just made that their product, which
Yeah.
ended up
Yeah.
working out great. So I guess like the best way to get around that is like find an idea that's okay, just start building it. Like maybe you pivot into something else. Maybe it actually turns out to be a great idea. And if not, like you probably will find something along the way. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think, yeah, I would agree. I think that, the advice where I'm like, hey, have you actually gone and talked to somebody in that industry? That's usually what I find myself telling somebody that doesn't really know how to program. It's just like an idea person, coming to you, and you're like, I'm not going to just start developing your random app for equity or whatever, like without knowing if it's actually something people want, right? But if it's
Yeah.
somebody that is like, a programmer or somebody that wants to create something, I might be more like, yeah, just start working on it, and at the same time try to contact these people and figure out if they want it, but don't give up. Just you might find out along the way there's a better idea, but starting on it is usually a better option than just not, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, like it depends. Like if you want to build something that you like actually end up selling, that's like you want to actually take to be like a company, like yeah, you should probably start with like talking to people and figure out if like that's because I also like talking to people is how you get new ideas. Like it's really hard to be like isolated in a room and say like
Yeah.
we have to think of new ideas, which we kind of did. Yeah, it's yeah, you won't come up with like amazing ideas this way, or like very, very rarely. It just needs
Yeah.
some like, external input to be like a bit more creative.
Yeah. So how did you end up with mime type then? And I know so Eric and I, we actually met about a month ago for some coffee in San Francisco when we were swapping sides of the world. I was flying out, and Eric was in town, so we grabbed some coffee. And you were telling me about a different idea, and so I'm curious, how did you go from this other idea that you were actively working on as a startup to mime type? What was that process like?
Yeah. So at that point, like we had essentially like two like very rough ideas. We had like the one we were working on, which was in the like collaborative app space. And then we had like another one in like generally the social media space. It wasn't like mime type exactly. It wasn't just as concrete yet. The thing is like my co-founder has like a very deep background in just like social media and social networks. He was actually one of the first designers at Substack and like saw that through the entire thing. So that's like a very, very unique skill set to have actually to be able to design like good social systems, like having that seen from like start to end. Then yeah, but we maybe just wanted to start with like an idea like getting creators paid. But we actually like talked to Chris, or like he talked to Chris about like general, and like they just bounce around like ideas about like this like generative AI, which is like fun and like people use it, but it's actually like quite hard to use. And it would be like nice to have like something where you can actually like build something around that and like allow people to be more creative. And like also I don't know if you know that, but like a lot of social networks have the problem that they actually find it like really hard to get people to post.
Oh,
Because like
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
usually people don't have yeah.
yeah, that's like the basic problem of at a social network, right? You get it, like so many people have had so many ideas for social networks, but like actually getting people to use it on a sort of like organic way is really hard, right?
I mean, yeah, like the thing about it is, I mean, like social networks tend to be like fun in like smaller groups. If you get started, if you have like 30 people and
Yeah.
you and your friends, as soon as you like expand it, like it's really hard to make that scale and to keep people engaged. And also like once you get too big, and then you get into like the problems that like Facebook has, where it's like, first of all, like if you have like a big following, you tend to post less because like your life probably isn't that interesting, and it's like
Yeah.
weird to like post something to like a few thousand users that like will stay there. So they actually like have problems with like generating content. So and like having like something where you can like basically like any idea you have, like turn that into like a stunning piece of content. Like can actually like get around that very, very nicely. And also having like the hack in the beginning of like people want to use Midjourney. I don't know if you noticed like all those like Discord channels around Midjourney. It's like all
Yeah.
like non-technical people who end up like, I don't know, getting into like Git and like looking into Python, although like they don't really want to look into that stuff,
Yeah.
just to,
Yep.
like generate images of themselves, because it's like really, really addicting, really, really fun. It's the superpower. You can like create anything you want. But yeah, like streamlining that, like putting your friends in it, having like the hook of like, it's addicting. Like we haven't like tested internally, but we have like this notification. I don't know, Gabriel generated an image with you. It's just like really fun to see. It's like incredible pictures. Yeah, I don't know.
Huh.
I really like the
So
idea.
yeah, so I'm just curious about like the more intimate details. Like, were you guys just like, we're not that excited about the idea that we did have, or were there conversations like we don't know how to pull this off, or it, like did you lock yourselves in a room then and you're like, no, we're gonna come up with this better idea? Like, how did that happen?
So I just noticed like Gabriel not being like as excited about it in the like after we started working on it, because it's like definitely more MySpace, because it's like I've worked in that space for basically my entire career. So I had like the entire like knowledge in that. His main strength is like he's like an incredible designer, which you can really apply to that idea and like use that. And he's like incredibly good at social systems as well. So after like starting to like work on it for like 1.5 weeks, we just like noticed that it's like not the best fit for like both of our like backgrounds, even though we like thought it might be like in the longer term. And yeah, that just kind of like bumps the like excitement about the idea like a little bit. And then yeah, we came up with that idea, and yeah.
So it's kind of based around feeling a lack of energy or excitement around the idea. But how did you actually come up with this new idea then? Like what process did you take? Did you like actually decide, okay, we're not going to do this anymore, let's find something else? Or like how did that happen?
I mean, yeah, we talked about it, like Gabriel not being as excited about it, and like yeah, we probably should think about new ideas and like find something that we're like both like really pumped about. Um, yeah, and then the idea just came up like organically. It was like Gabriel came back from the talk with Chris and was like incredibly excited. It wasn't exactly that idea, but it was like in this like general direction. And yeah, we just both got like really excited about like the space in general. Like
Yeah.
we actually, like I'm in the co-working, we were like sitting at like a table right outside the door and just like brainstormed for an hour on that, and then like came up with the general idea. It's like a longer plan, like with that platform. It's like not just that what you see right now, which I'm like really excited about. I
Yeah,
can't
I'm sure.
afford it yet, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that is like I have a lot of memories of that. I think especially maybe when I was like in university and college, and like you'd hang out with like your programming buddy or whatever, eating some pizza at like 2 in the morning, and just like, oh, I got this great idea, and then you just start like riffing on the idea and like coming up with is that kind of the energy in the
Yeah.
situation in this case? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like okay, in general, like that isn't the best idea, the best way to like come up with like validated ideas, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, but in this case, because like we like at least we have like some experience in the social space, because like usually like social apps are like incredibly sexy and like people want to build them, but they
Yeah.
actually don't know how to build them.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's like a I don't know why like I don't know if you know like it's like a startup accelerative, like a lot of like videos on YouTube with like startup advice, and they have like this idea of like tar pit ideas, which is like
Okay.
ideas that like sound very sexy and like a lot of people try, but they're like sticky and like it's hard to get out of them, and they actually don't end up being good ideas. At least if you don't
Mm.
know what you're doing. And there's like apps in that area generally tend to be like social media apps. Um, so it's like you have to be like very thoughtful about if you like when you start like a social media app, and you have to be like you have to like have a plan, and you have to like have a like unique insight. So yeah.
I think what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're really saying is you and your team have some actual experience in this space. So
Yeah.
you're not just, coming up with some random idea like we were talking about earlier in some industry you don't know anything about.
Yeah.
You're applying an idea to something you are familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm curious, like how you then got to even this point. So if we go back further, you've mentioned YC. Just for people that might not be familiar with it, can you give a quick like summary of what YC is? Y Combinator is the full name, right?
Oh yeah. I mean it's like a like startup accelerator here in San Francisco. They have like incredible like resources online. They have like startup school as well. It's just like if you start a company, like you should really look into that like YouTube channel in general. They have like a lot of like really great content and like things to avoid. They actually have like a great video about also like how to come up with ideas. Yeah, I can just like really recommend like all the resources there. But, yeah.
So you currently in any program that helps you build a startup? Is that the path that you're on, or is this something that you are self-funding or you have investment on? Is this something you do in your spare time?
Oh, it's like yeah, we definitely like are in like an accelerator for like startups. But it's also like we don't pay ourselves like a salary yet, so it's like self-funded,
Okay.
but also like part of an accelerator in general. But yeah,
Okay, so the accelerator, I imagine, provides some support and resources, but this is also coming from your own funding to some
yeah,
extent.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I think then it's like how did you end up getting to, you know, an accelerator or going that route? Like what did it start with? And it sounds like it didn't start with this idea that you're on now. Did getting into this accelerator depend on some other idea? Or I guess like I'm just trying to understand, like, what was that process like? How did you end up in the accelerator or decide to get into it, you know?
Yeah. So like we got into the accelerator with like a different idea. Like even different than the like one we like pivoted to like 1.5 weeks. It was like a completely like different space as well. It was in the like manufacturing and like chip space. So like completely different world. Um, yeah. Um,
So what I'm hearing is the idea can really morph a lot
yeah,
during
yeah,
this
no, it came off
journey.
a lot, yeah.
And
Especially in the early stages of like it's like really really it's almost like unheard of like starting like startup with like one particular idea and like sticking to that idea till the end like you will always end up like morphing it along the way. So yeah.
okay, so that makes me wonder, is this something you feel like is specific to startups in general, or what about just any random programming project somebody wants to start? Like maybe talking about your previous experience on other projects. Did they always start with you being like, okay, I got an idea, you just execute on it and there's no morphing of the idea? Is that how it worked for you before? Or, is this a sort of repeated pattern where you have an idea, you start working on it, and then it just sort of morphs?
I guess it depends on like the size of the project. There's like definitely some like smaller projects which you just like execute because it's like something you want to have. I feel like if it's something you do over more than like half a year or something, or like even a few months, like it will always morph to like a certain extent into like a different idea or like expand a bit into like one particular area that you notice is like very valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that makes me wonder, how do you know when to do that? When do you sort of be like, okay, maybe my original idea was only 50% good and I should go in this direction? And I know we previously talked about you feeling a lack of energy or excitement. Is that sort of your guiding principle in general with other projects, or have you run into other cases where, something like say with Slate YJS or other projects like that, where sort of changed, mid journey, so to speak, you know?
I mean, the interesting thing about Slate YJS is it actually came out of like another like startup I did, which where we like built like a collaborative learning tool, and like it's like something I noticed while working on that. Like, hey, there's nothing out there to actually like build collaborative editors like very quickly. So that was like a very like concrete idea because it like came out of like a very acute problem we had. It's like a smaller scope. So I had like the initial version of Stable.js I developed in like a week or something. That was like very small scope. But in the end, like it's still like also like morphed a bit because you have like a bit of like feature creep and like you notice that like some things are like a bit more valuable once you like actually have like other people using that as well. But overall, I feel like yeah, you know if the idea is good or not. But you talk to like users, you see if like you actually like look how are people like using your product. Um, is it like what you're building actually valuable? And then like you go based on that. And of course, if it's like a project you're doing for like several years, you should also like listen to yourself. Is there like something I want to work on? But yeah.
Oh, okay. So I feel like I'm sensing a theme. It sounds like what you've often done is you are already building something, and that spawns new ideas, whether it's coming from a position of, I'm just not that excited about this, or maybe you talk to people using it and I'm just guessing, maybe they tell you, oh, I wish it did this or something.
Yeah.
Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, it's not even like I wish I did this. It's also like them having like some other related pain which you like weren't aware of. It's like, oh, that's like because if you like start talking to users, like you usually see like some like interesting patterns which you like weren't aware of, and which might be like tangent to your idea, but like not actually be exactly like your idea. Where you can like
Mm.
switch into, and it's like probably like a more valuable thing to fix long term. But yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I feel like this is creating a sort of interesting nuance to our initial discussion of how to start things. Because on the one hand, I feel like both of us were saying, like just a random idea is maybe not that valuable, but it feels like you're also saying you should start building things, because once you start building it, you'll see what the valuable ideas is. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I mean, like it's like a way to come up with like valuable ideas, I guess. It's like very hard to come up with valuable ideas just like thinking about them and like validating that they're like actually good. But like once you like start building something, like you usually will come up with valuable ideas because you start talking to people, you like maybe experience some pains while working on that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's been my experience as well. And I think you've sort of touched on this, but is also a distinction between sort of hobby things where, and I think the difference is projects where you are the user is different than projects where you're coming up with an idea and you might be a user, but maybe you're not the primary user you're creating it for. I feel like that's also a distinction too. And so and I'm curious if you would agree, but something I have told people is maybe if you're not sure, start working on something that is a hobby or is important for you, and maybe that'll morph into something else. You would agree with that, it sounds like?
Yeah. No, I think it's a very, I mean, you have to be in like a very particular situation to be able to say like, yeah, I'm dropping everything. I'm now going to like work on a startup, and I haven't validated it before. I don't know if it's a good idea.
Yeah.
You have to be like in a very particular spot to be able to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think when I think back to sort of the most, I don't know if you could call them a success, but in my mind, the most successful projects that I have worked on, they've all come from either me building something for myself that I wanted, or being in a situation like I was volunteering at a small business, right? And I saw them using Excel spreadsheets for something. And then I'm like, wow, I could make that so much better, where you're like identifying an actual pain point for someone, right? So it's almost like ideas in of themselves might be cheap and not worth that much. But if you start building and actually try to find real users for it that can sort of direct you towards what to actually work on, is that maybe a good way to summarize what we've said so far?
Oh yeah, it's a very good way. Yeah.
I'm sort of making this up as we go instead of having you answer it, but that's just sort of my interpretation. Yeah, so I think the next question that this begs in my mind is the other part of this equation, which is the users. So let's say I have an idea and I start building it, and maybe I'm not the primary user. Maybe I came up with some idea that I thought some people might like. How do I actually talk to users? Like, have you had experience with that? Like that initial stage when you're like, hey, I made this cool new thing, or even like say mime type, like how do you actually find people to talk to and talk to them? How do you complete that step of this equation?
I mean, it like definitely differs between like business to business and business to customer apps. The
Mm-hmm.
good thing about like business to business apps, if you're like actually solving a problem, it's like not usually not that hard to just like reach out to people on like LinkedIn or email, like write them like, hey, I'm working on something to like solve like this particular problem. Would you be open to chat? That's like usually a very good way to just to like hear kind of the vibe that's out there. Uh, Also, like usually, I mean, you probably have like some sort of connections usually in like a space you're building because it somehow came up with that idea and you noticed someone like experiencing that pain point. So you can like usually like also leverage like just your connections. But yeah, like people are like way more willing to talk to you if you're like solve. I mean, essentially, like you're solving a pain they're having. So like usually
Mm-hmm.
people are like very open to like.
So almost what you're saying is if you make something and you can't find anyone to talk to you about it, maybe you're
It's
not
usually
actually solving a real pain point.
yeah, for
Interesting.
sure.
I've never thought of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So maybe this is easier if I frame it in terms of an older project for you. So specifically with Slate YJS, how did this process go for that? Like, did you create the initial version of it and then put it up on, I don't know, some site on the internet and have people give you feedback, or like did you ask your friends, or like how did you kind of launch that project?
I mean, like again, it started as like a part of another project. I like put that into a different package. There's like if you're like building dev tools or like libraries, like usually like GitHub issues is like a very good place to look because you will see like people having like one particular problem. For say YJS, there was like a huge GitHub issue in like the Slate repository, which is like a framework to build text editors, where like people are like complaining like, hey, I use this, I want to make it collaborative, but I have like no idea how. There's like nothing out there. And so the launch for Slate YJS literally was just, hey, I made this library. You can like plug it into your Slate editor and you can have it like collaborative in like 15 minutes or something. And that generated like a lot of like a lot of companies like got like like made me aware of that like project through that. Actually, like funnily enough, like the guy behind YJS, I didn't know him at the time. He's also like German. He also made like he was aware of that through that and like reached out to me. So that was like really, really interesting. It was just like a good mix. But yeah, because there was like an existing pain people were having, just posting under that, like letting them know, hey, there's like a solution to your problem. Yeah, that's how I launched it. But I didn't actually intend for it to be like a bigger thing. I guess it isn't. It's like not a huge GitHub project. It's like 400 stars or something. But actually, like quite a few companies picked it up. So yeah, sometimes just like putting stuff out there without having the intention to like make it a big thing, and like having that picked up by users is yeah.
Part where you're sort of saying, I found a place where people were expressing essentially a pain point, and you were just like, "Hey, I might have solved your pain point."
Yeah.
So like finding a place where people are expressing that pain point and just being like, "Hey, I might have solved it," or even. Yeah. Maybe if you hadn't solved it, if you had posted on there being like, "Hey, I have this idea for this. You guys would be interested. What features would you want?" That kind of thing. Is that also maybe an approach you could take? Like, because I feel like the problem with being like, okay, there's a pain point and I found where people are complaining about it. Not everything can just be built in a week, right? Yeah. And so I kind of want to dig into like that aspect of it too. Like, how do you figure out what to build and get that feedback without necessarily going and spending 3 years building something first, maybe, right? So I think that's like one point that you brought up, right? Is that whole like, I found a pain point, people are asking about it, I'm just gonna say, hey, I solved it, right? You were mentioning like, okay, I found this pain point, and I've actually had a similar experience. So I launched a project. I found a forum where people were like discussing it, and I was like, oh, hey, I made this. And I think that one like forum post was the best marketing I ever had for that entire project ever, because it was like, that's where people went. They're like, oh, somebody solved my problem,
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting thing, but I'd never sort of formalized this in my head of like a thing to do. So almost like when you're starting something, and the reason why I'm sort of digging into this is because I feel like I've been in the situation where I'm like, hey, I've got this cool thing. I think people will want it, but I don't know how to tell people about it. It's sort of like marketing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure I don't consider myself a marketing expert. I don't know if you do, but like as someone like just that likes to make things, I feel like your approach makes a lot of sense. Like if you can find somewhere that people are expressing this pain point, even if you post it and people are like, oh no, this doesn't solve my problem, maybe that gives you ideas for how to solve it. Maybe they'll tell you from there. At least you found the users. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah. I mean, also like the like good thing about like forum threads like that, like usually people are like discussing how like a solution could look like, and you can like use that as like research directly to like shape your idea. And also, yeah, I feel like most ideas like should be able to be built or like have like an MVP. And it's like not like, of course, like not every idea can be like that, but like most idea you should be able to distill down to something you can build in maybe not a week, like depends on your level of experience, but like in like 2 or 3 weeks, like get it out there and like see how people are like interacting with it, and if it's like actually something that solves their problem. Even if it's crappy, like it
Yeah.
will be crappy if you will in like 1 or 2 weeks. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So, and I definitely want to expand upon this, but I feel like what I'm hearing from you is trying to build something quickly is valuable in this process. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have like an initial idea what you want to build, and you think you've like identified a pain point that's valuable, then just try to build it like very quickly. Yeah, get in front of users and see if it's actually like something that solves it.
But what if I have this really grand idea and I am going to completely change the world, but this grand idea involves like 30 other things being implemented first? How can I do that in 2 weeks?
I mean, like usually, like most of those like grand ideas, like as you said, like you have like 30 things you want to implement first. So like usually, probably one of those things might be like a better idea to start on, and then like if that works out, like expand into the grand idea, because it's like the worst feeling building something for like a year and then
Yeah.
like noticing nobody cares about your idea.
Yeah. Have you had this experience?
I mean, I like with the like first in high school, I did like a like project like the learning tool for students. It was like a different idea in the beginning even, and like we worked a lot on it. It was like a valuable like experience for sure because it like taught me a lot about development. But I wish we would have like started with like a way smaller prototype, just gotten that into in front of users and then like taking it from there. But yeah.
Yeah, I actually, that's something I feel like I've had to learn over and over again. And I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like there's this tendency, and I've seen this with other friends that I have that are programmers, of like expanding the scope more than is necessary for the MVP. Like there's just this sort of instinct that I have where it's like, oh no, I need to get this done first and this done first and get this, and then I can, right? Like, do you run into that?
Oh yeah, for sure. You have to be like incredibly strict on yourself. Like, what is the essential thing we're trying to do, and like, how can we cut that down as much as possible? And it also
Yeah.
like always feels rough because it's like not your like final vision, and you feel like, oh, because like that's not in there, like people aren't gonna like it. And yeah, like launching an MVP is rough because it's not the vision. It's usually like not how you like really want it to be long term. it's just like the minimal amount of things that is valuable. But the thing is, like, even if it's crappy, like if you're actually solving a problem, people will use that crappy version. And if you have
Yeah.
people that use that crappy version to solve their problem, they're like, of course, like it's like probably the strongest indicator that you have like built something valuable or like found something valuable.
Yeah. I, as a sort of backing evidence for this, I worked on a project with a group of friends for like 6 months, and we had this grand idea, and we were trying really hard to limit it. I kept having to be like, no, I think we just need to focus on this, right? And it sort of fizzled out after, I don't know, after some time, like people went their own separate ways, whatever. It fizzled out. That's fine, right? But what was really fascinating to me is like 6 months later, I just happened to find this service that seemed to be doing quite well, was, software as a service, right? This software as a service was selling just this one tiny component that we had built for this larger thing. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? We could have just sold that. Like, we built this. It was just one piece of this much larger thing. And like, literally, that's all we had to do was this one little piece. I don't know if you've had that similar experience, but that was a big wake up call for me where I'm like, wow, I thought I was being restrictive, but I could have been even more restrictive.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. Yeah, I guess it's like a thing which like almost all developers are guilty of, because you like always directly want to implement the ground vision.
Yeah.
I mean, like even just having launched that, as you said, like the small piece, it's just a starting point. So like it's something to get like revenue and to get like users, and then like you can like always expand into like the final vision. So
yeah. I think another story that I like to tell related to this was I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but I one of the projects I've always been obsessed with is sort of an operating system, but the grander vision is much larger than that. Like this, I think of it as this whole new computing system, this new way of programming computers, right? And I'm like, well, this is a ridiculously huge vision. Like if I just went and like made it, it would take like 100 years. And by then I'm sure computers would be long past whatever idea I had. Right. And so I was like, all right, what can I do in 1 month? And so I've sort of learned, at least for me, what has worked well is setting a time deadline. Instead of setting like a feature deadline, I set a time deadline where I'm like, okay, whatever I can get done in this amount of time, that's what I have built, and that's what I'm going to go with. And in that project, it worked. I was like amazed. I literally wrote from scratch a bootloader and an operating system and a compiler and an interpreter and a standard library and my own language in 1 month. And I was like, I had no idea I could do this in 1 month. And I'm not like saying this to be like I'm an amazing programmer or something, because I don't think I am. It wasn't good code or whatever, right? But I'm curious if you've had that sort of similar experience. Have you ever sort of set a time deadline and or been in like a situation where there is a time deadline, and that's helped you sort of get over that issue of overbuilding things?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely like the best tool to get around overbuilding that. Like, yeah, no, I have like 2 weeks to build this. Like, what can I get done in that amount of time? And just like limiting, because like first of all, like it's a great motivator just to like work hard during that time to like actually put something out there, just saying like I will launch that on like this particular day. There's like
Yeah.
and yeah, it's like also like because it like really like makes you think about like what is actually like the essential part I want to get out there, like what's the part I can build. It's like a great tool to like distill down your idea.
Yeah. It really forces you to be like, okay, what actually is the core of my idea here, or at least the core of what I can launch in this amount of time. Is that right? Yeah. And at least with that project, what was really fascinating to me was like the end result of what I built, building all of that in a month, it's not going to really solve many people's problems, right? Like it's not really going to do that. But I put it up on a website. I like went through the motions of like, hey, I made this. And I would say it's funny. It's one of those things I haven't had the time to really work on like I would like to. It's just a big project, right? But I think it's generated the most like passionate responses from people. Like over time, people are just like, wow, I've been wanting the same thing. I want to build this. I think, and so what I took away from that is like, even if, it wasn't something that I ended up launching and making a ton of money from, like it still in my head proved out the idea because I had people coming to me and saying, yeah, I would actually, I know of some use cases for this. I would want this, like, and so I don't know. To me, I thought that was really interesting. Like I thought it was, I guess what I'm saying is I thought it was basically worthless, because like you couldn't effectively do anything with it, but it spurred other people to be like, oh, I actually, if you implemented this part of it, I would use this. This would be useful to me, but maybe nobody ever thought of that until they saw the work I put into building it, and then they're like, oh, wow, I did need that, so I guess to make this into more of a conversation, not just me talking, I think if I remember right, when we were having coffee, you mentioned something about like doing hackathons or something. Is that correct? Like you had done something like that before?
I had like I like sponsored funded my like pocket money during like school and like a bit of my like income during university through hackathons. I feel like, I mean, it's like even more extreme because it's like you have like 24 hours to build out like an MVP for like an idea. It's probably like, I mean, you won't build like an amazing product in like 24 hours, but if you like are just looking for like ideas to do or like projects to do, just having that like forced time frame around you where you have like because like if you set your deadline, you say like, oh yeah, I'm gonna publish it in 2 weeks. It's hard to like force yourself to actually publish it in 2 weeks and not like extend that later on.
Yeah.
But if you have like a jury, like hackathons, it's like, oh yeah, you have like there's like an external deadline, so there's like no way of getting around that. So that's like very, very well.
I'm curious, is that also something that comes with being in a startup accelerator? Is that something that I actually don't know the answer to this because I haven't been in one, but I'm curious, is that a part of sort of the value they provide too? Is, maybe not like a hard deadline, but kind of giving you that type of thing to be like, okay, I need to have a demo by someday or something like that?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely like one part. It's like you have to have like a demo by some point, and you also have like it also gives you like an excuse to like just like really, really grind on that and like kind of like, I don't know, like put your like other life on hold to like just focus on that because you have like this deadline, you have to have something out by like some point. And it's like, hey, like for the next, I don't know, like 2 months, I'm just like grinding on that because I'm like in that accelerator. Like you can like kind of use that to like not have like, as like an excuse, for example, to like not put that much like effort for that time frame into like a social life because like it's just grinding on that thing. But yeah.
So another valuable service the Startup Accelerator provides is cuts off your social life. Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, it gives you like though you just have like a time frame where you have to like really, really work hard and you have like an excuse to like just focus on that for like that particular amount of time.
Yeah. I'm sort of just kidding, but yeah, makes sense. So yeah, I think the sort of summary of that section is setting a time deadline can be more valuable than I think the natural tendency, which is to set feature deadlines. Yeah. That definitely speaks with my experience too. But I think that then ties into another aspect of this. Let's say you're not at a hackathon. how do you like actually stick to your deadline? And have you run into the situation where you're afraid or embarrassed of what you built, and so you're like, it's too hard to push the go button, like I'm like afraid of what people are gonna say, you know?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, again, like MVPs launching is painful. I guess like one thing to like stick to your deadlines is just to tell other people about, like, hey, you can try this out in like 2 weeks. So at least you have like some external pressure of like not wanting to like disappoint other people. It's like, hey, you said you're gonna launch this, like where is it? Like that feels a bit painful. So like giving yourself that external pressure a bit definitely helps. Um yeah, like also, yeah, you just have to like know that it's like an MVP isn't perfect. You just have to learn to be okay with like launching something that isn't 100% there yet. I feel like forcing yourself to go through that once teaches you how valuable it actually is, and then you become better at it over time. But yeah,
Yeah, I think I would agree, and I think programmers and engineers, we have this instinct to not do that, right? Like it's just it somehow runs against the programming mentality. Like especially when I think of like the most detailed, most like really good programmers, it seems to run most counter to their like instincts. And yeah, so I think I'm curious. Like, do you think the hackathon experience? Do you think that sort of helped change or like reframe the way you think about it? Or maybe it didn't. I don't know. I'm just curious. Like you mentioned, oh, going through it once helped you, handle it better. Um, did you find the going through it once was hackathons or not? Or I'm just curious, like if somebody is approaching this from I've never done it before and I'm afraid to, you know, did you have an experience that sort of speaks to that situation?
yeah, yeah. Hackathons definitely help with that. It's also like the another part of it is like going through the pain of not doing that with like the like first like
Mm,
bigger project I did, which like shows you kind of like how painful it is not to do that. Yeah, I guess it's like a combination of both. Yeah, going through hackathons definitely like helps you a lot in like distilling down, sticking to a time frame, and then like experiencing the pain of not doing that, which I like don't recommend. But yeah,
what do you mean by that? The pain of not doing it?
yeah. I mean, it's like yeah, like you spend like half a year or something building something, launching it, and like nobody cares. It's
Yeah.
it's not a great feeling, but
Well,
yeah.
so I feel like you mentioned this before, but do you have specifics? Like, what did you build?
Or like the like we built like a lot of like the I did like another company or like not company it was a company but it was like more of like a smaller-ish project uh,
Yeah.
and we like started with like a learning tool for students, but we like built like a lot of like really like the initial version of that had like a lot of like features nobody really cared about, which we like just put in because we like thought, oh yeah, this amazing tool, people will use it this way. And we spent
Yeah.
like a lot of time building that feature set. And we had to like essentially scrap almost all of those features we built for like 6 months. Uh,
I'm curious. Can you like give us any details about what you built? Like what did you actually make?
so okay, we like worked on like a learning app for students. So where you can essentially like think of it like an all-in-one learning tool, like Anki plus Notes
Okay.
plus like
Yeah.
collaboration, and then like put kind of like GitHub around it to share it. Um, that was the like grand vision in the beginning. And like one big mistake we made, I feel like in the beginning, is just because we like didn't 100% think about how it's actually going to be used. So we made like a wrong decision on the foundation of the software. Basically, we started with like a text editor kind of thing, which if you think about how you actually like what do you use in like classrooms, it's not, or most people don't use like
Mm,
Evernote, for example, because it's like
yeah.
a very
Yeah.
limiting thing. You usually use something like OneNote or like a Canvas based thing, which is like an insight because like building text editors on the web it's actually quite hard. It doesn't sound like a hard problem, but like put like a lot of time into that. If we just would have like launched a small version of that, noticed that like, hey, people actually don't want to use like a primarily they want to have like a canvas based interface, which is like a lot different to build. That would have been like a hugely valuable experience in the beginning, for example. Yeah. It
Yeah,
would
no,
have saved us a lot of time. Yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think it makes a lot more concrete. Like, oh, yeah, totally. That makes sense. And I think it speaks to the engineering part of us again, where it's so hard not to over engineer it. You're like, you get this idea in your head of like, this is what people want, and you build this massive machinery around it to solve it. And then you're like, oh, they wanted something slightly different. And now the machinery and the foundation I built is kind of completely wrong, right? Is that
Yeah.
kind of like what you're saying? Yeah.
And so small decisions in the beginning that's like really easy to fix early on. But if you commit like 6 months to it, it's like one small minor change you should have done in the beginning, but it like will cost you a ton of work later on because you didn't
Yeah.
put it in front of users. But yeah.
So tying this back to MIME type, how have you been applying that sort of ideal to MIME type? Like, did you set a time limit for when you guys were gonna launch it? Did you then, like, how did you go through this process, I guess, with MIME type? Did you sit there with your co-founder or co-founders and say like, all right, this is our deadline, this is what it's going to be? Like, I'm just curious about the actual concrete, like, what did you do in this case?
Oh no, we totally set like a hard deadline. We said like by like 2 weeks after like starting work on the city, we want to have like the good thing about like social media apps, like very easy to find like initial customers, because it's like in 2 weeks, I want like my like network to use it. Like I want to spread it out there, and I want to give it like, usually I have like, I don't know, like 15, we each had like 15 people in mind we want like to send the app to. And it's like by this deadline, like we want them to use it and to like see if they actually are going to use it, and just using that as like the external deadline, and using that also as like input, like, is this actually fun to use? Are they like continuing to use it? So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So again, with MIME type, I'm curious about the sort of execution side of it. So you said, okay, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Now, how did you go from we're going to do something in 2 weeks to actually figuring out what you're going to build in those 2 weeks?
I mean, the good thing is like we're really good at executing apps and like websites. So we knew we could just build like an app. The thing we had to like really cut down on is the actual like ML part. Like what's the like off the shelf kind of thing we can use to like make that work without that much effort? Like what tools can we use that like don't provide, because like in the end, like in 2 weeks you can generate like amazing photos of yourself, because it's like very hard, but you can like use like existing tools to like approach that to have like okay-ish photos. And you have to of course also do, because like long term we want to have stuff like, of course, like it sucks to take selfies of yourself during onboarding. It's like very hard to build like an intuitive UI around that. And so we would, like long term, for example, would want to have like an Instagram import, because that's like like web experience, but you can't do that in 2 weeks. So like you cut that down, you use like what's out there to approach the idea.
Yeah.
Like, prove that it's like interesting to generate images of yourself, like, or of your friends, that like people actually want to do that. And then yeah.
So that makes sense to me, but like, how did you arrive at that? I kind of want to get into the mechanics of it. And the reason is I feel like this is another sort of stumbling block, especially if if we're not like you and we haven't done this 100 times, right? Like you're like, okay, I've got this idea, and maybe I've talked to people and they're like, yeah, this is a pain point, I want this. And you've decided I'm going to do it in 2 weeks. Like, let's say MIME type, you decided you want to do this in 2 weeks. How did you actually break this task down? Do you just get out like a piece of pencil and paper and write down some feature ideas? Do you start estimating how long certain things are going to take? Like, what sort of process did you go through?
We broke it down into like very like granular features or stuff we want to have. Then I mean, like you have to have some experience to be able to like estimate how long stuff will take, because if you have never done anything, probably will take longer. But we had like a pretty goodish idea like how long we would need to take for like each task. We like kind of assigned like that will take, I don't know, like one day, that will take like 5 days, like assign that
Okay.
and have
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
hard limit. Like, yeah, we have like 14 points to give. Like, which tasks do we choose? Like, first of all, like which are the tasks like you can't skip at all? And then like what are the like other tasks that we can, like
Okay.
you only have like 14 points to give. If to be like really tough on yourself, like you can only implement like those features, like features that fit into this like budget. And yeah.
Okay. So you kind of created well, I guess you took the days as your budget and broke
Yeah.
it down that way. Okay. So then my question becomes, based on my experience, like for example, in this operating system project I worked on, I took a similar approach. I broke things down, but then I didn't quite get some things right. In one case, the bootloader ended up I just got mired in it, and it was like 4 days into it. And I'm like, if I spend another 4 days on this, I'm not going to have time to do everything else. And so that sort of forced me to be like, okay, are there any alternatives here? Like can I, and eventually I did find an alternative to what I was trying to accomplish. I'm curious if with MIME type or maybe another project, if you ran into something like that. Like, do you have your 14-day budget, right? How strictly do you stick to the sub budget, I guess? Because that's what it sounds like you did. You sort of made smaller budgets for each feature, right?
Yeah.
Like, what happens if something takes longer than you expected?
I mean, the good thing about like having an assigned budget is it makes you like really notice it. But because if you know, like I put like 2 points into that, and now it takes like 3, I have to like kill something else to like make that work if I don't get it done like right now. That makes you, during the execution, like really, really think about how you can achieve it in that budget, or like what
Yeah.
other approaches you can use to make that work. Of course, you like overestimate or underestimate a few things and like overestimate. In our case, like for MIME type, it worked out okay-ish. The good thing,
I
like
love that.
if you like
Okay-ish.
take too long on like one task, like you just have to kill other tasks. Like you see that, oh no, like that took 2 points longer, so I'm gonna have to like kill something else. But yeah, like with that framework, you should really think about like what are the like core features, like what's the stuff like
Yeah.
won't work without, like start on those and then have the like more optional like smaller things you can like still kill, or actually like include if you are like faster in the task like later on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess that's ultimately what happened with the operating system project. Was I had to be like, I can't use a normal off the shelf bootloader, but the bootloader isn't really the main thing I'm trying to build. Like, all it does is launch all the stuff that I want. I don't really care about it, but I was building it because the existing ones didn't work for it. What I eventually ended up finding was a thing that was like sort of like a bare metal OS that you could use to launch your own process. And then essentially that OS just went away, and its memory got overwritten and wasn't used anymore. But it had the bootloader and it set everything up. And I was like, so that ended up saving me tons of time. But I would, if I had to just be like, okay, no, I can't keep working on this, or I don't get to do the actual stuff that's important. And so I guess that brings up the next question of how did you decide what was the most important things? How did you prioritize? And I think the reason why I want to talk about this is because maybe if you actually have launched something and you have people giving you feedback, that's maybe easier to figure out. But before that point, how do you figure it out? How do you actually narrow it down and be like, no, this is the most important thing?
I mean, it comes down to like doing anything, you have like a hypothesis of like what's the like problem you want to solve, or like what's the like
Mm-hmm.
thing you're trying to do, and then you have to be like really, it's hard, but you have to be like really really honest, like what's the core thing in your app, or like the
Mm-hmm.
core flow, or essentially like what is the core you're trying to prove, like what's the like essential features that you like need to actually validate it. And you have to be like really really honest, like do I really need, I don't know, like Facebook login if I want to prove
Mm-hmm.
that like generating images of you is fun? Like you don't need that. You just need to, in the beginning, you just need like an app where you can like put something in and you can like generate images of like somebody else. So like, for example, for like mime type, you don't need to build login. You can even start with just like pre-training uh the models on like your friends, like don't have a UI on that, like just use that as your core. Just find out what is the thing you're trying to validate that's like actually valuable, and then like build the minimal thing you can do to validate that. And then if you have like a set time frame, maybe you can like, I don't know, like expand it a bit, make it a bit nicer, but you just have to figure out like what is the essential core you need to build to validate your idea, or to validate that it's like valuable what you're building.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're still sort of relying on this time limit to force us to decide what the core thing really is. Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that that Facebook login or whatever, that is so accurate. Like, yeah, I feel like I've been involved in so many projects where you're like, okay, we need the login system, we need the account creation system, we need the whatever XYZ, and then yeah, you get into it, you're like, oh, do we actually need that to do this? Like, and I think what I ended up doing, on one project, which the way I sort of got around this was I was like, oh, I don't have time to like end up building the account creation and everything. And so like I made the initial version like every user was an anonymous user. Like I just didn't
Yeah.
have time for it. So I was like, hey, go to this URL. It creates a new account for you. And like, there's no UI for it. And you can't really like permanently use this, but like you can try it out and tell me like what you think. Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that other than like, yeah, it's totally my experience too, is like it you have these ideas in your head, but you don't really know until you start like where you're forced to actually fit it into a time frame, and then you're like, oh, I guess I don't really need that, or you're
Yeah.
forced to work around it, right?
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, especially with stuff like login, like of course you need that at some point. So like it's like really hard to like actually like not include the spec. But if you're like forced to like, hey, you have to ship this in 2 weeks, and like login takes time to build, especially if you can't use like a off-the-shelf solution. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
like it really forces you to be like, actually, yeah, I don't need that for like the app to provide like some amount of value, and to like, yeah, it like
yeah,
prove
yeah,
the idea. Yeah.
yeah. So so that's sort of mime type, but I kind of want to push this idea back further into your history. So you it sounds to me like you've sort of had this evolution where you started out, and maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but you started out just, okay, I spent a long time building this, and I don't know, maybe people weren't really interested in it. And then over time, you've sort of honed this skill of like, okay, restrict myself to a certain amount of time, and all of this that we've already talked about, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, if we go all the way back, what was like the first project you ever actually built and shared with people, whether that was friends or online, or is this in high school? It sounded like maybe.
Yeah. I mean, like the like first project I built and shared with people like nobody cared about, of course, was like just like libraries and stuff like that, which is like I was into like machine learning back then, and like I built like some tools, shared them, like nobody really cared about it. I guess it's like how you start as a developer, because like usually the stuff you built in the beginning isn't as valuable, but it's again then it's like a different kind of project that you build it to just learn.
Yeah. So
And
so what was it? What was the first thing you ever built and tried to share? Do you remember?
oh, it's called think it was called Bitneat. It's still on my GitHub. It's just like a implementation of like a Neat. It's like one way to like an evolutionary like algorithm to like machine learn, like to basically like train a neural network to like do
Yeah.
a task.
Did you like put it like who did you share it with when you made it?
I mean, it was just like a small project, so I put it on on GitHub, like posted it under like a few YouTube videos. That was my outreach strategy back then.
Okay, no,
Like
that's
shared
good.
it.
That's good. Yeah. So I'm curious. So you posted it on YouTube, right? And I'm just correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm imagining you were like, oh, I'm gonna put this on YouTube, and people are gonna see it, and they're gonna think this is so cool. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what actually happened?
I mean, in the end, like it was like a hobby project, so like nobody really cared about it. I think it has like 6 stars, but it still was like really interesting because I got like one guy back then that was like, "Hey, you have like this error there," and it was like really
Yeah.
helpful. So at least like somebody, I don't know, that was like an interesting experience, I guess. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was
well, I
great.
guess what I'm really getting at is, was there a moment where you were like, oh, this didn't go viral on YouTube? Like, and were you feeling kind of bad about it?
I actually didn't end up feeling. It was like a very great learning experience, and I guess like that one guy like replying to it like really kept my like motivation up.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah, I've been there. And the reason I want to dig into this is because, again, I feel like if somebody is listening to this and maybe they just are learning React, and they're not somebody that's been programming since high school, or maybe they're in high school, they haven't done this before. I feel like that can all be really discouraging when you're like maybe somebody listens to this and they're like, okay, I am going to spend 2 weeks and I'm going to build this and I'm going to do everything they say. And then they, post their YouTube videos and they get 3 views and 2 of them were their mom, like, right? Like that can happen, And so I guess what I just want to, dig into is like those feelings and then, where you went with them, because like I feel like that can be pretty disheartening. You're like, oh, I posted this to Reddit or Hacker News or YouTube, and not very many people were interested. And I don't know, have you had this in, I guess, in other projects too? Have you ever built something else before and people weren't that interested? And that, like, I don't know, how does that affect you?
I mean, it doesn't feel great, of course. I
Yeah,
feel like everyone goes through that experience at some point. The good
yeah,
thing is like if you build something, especially in the beginning, like regardless if it gets picked up or not, you have to look at it also as like a very like valuable learning experience because you built something. And
yeah,
even if like nobody looks at it, especially if you're like a junior like dev and get started, like if you just post it on GitHub, like you can still extract like a huge amount of value from it by just putting it on like your resume or stuff like that.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, I feel like every project you do, like you learn something, even if it doesn't take off. And that's how you can like cope with it not actually ending working out. Like you have
Yeah.
to be like what like it's still amazing. Like you build a product, like you launched something that can be used. But yeah, I also maybe you should just also like put more. I feel like that's something like I struggled with as well in the beginning. It's just like also learning about like marketing and like how to get your product out there. I feel like most developers aren't. I'm not that great at it. But I feel I have like some experience in that. But it's like also like a very valuable skill to learn. So maybe it's not even your project that was the issue. Maybe you just need to find a way to actually, I don't know, post it on Product Hunt or something, and then like see where it goes from there. But yeah,
Yeah, I think you're really hitting on a whole nother aspect of this, because it's also possible that that thing you built, maybe it was incredible and maybe it would have solved somebody's problem. Maybe some business or somebody, if they had known about it, would have been like, oh, that's exactly what I needed, or I could incorporate that into my library. Um, but yeah, that marketing side is, man, I don't, this is something that I will never claim I am very good at, because I struggle with it a lot. It's like, and I think there's two parts of it. There's one, like the mechanics of actually doing it. How do you actually market something? But then for me, at least, there's a whole nother side of like, I just don't really like doing it. It's like I want to build stuff. I don't know. Have you felt that too, or do you like that whole aspect of it?
Oh no, marketing definitely, like marketing and outreach is definitely I needed, it was something I needed to force myself to do in the beginning. But I
Yeah.
think it's something you kind of like learn to love a bit, because it's also like a big advantage, because like most developers aren't great at it. So if you just do
It's true. Yeah.
like if you do like a semi-valuable like open source project and you just like put effort into marketing, that probably will at least get like some attention or some feedback on the thing. So I feel like it's something you just have to force yourself to do, to like have something that people actually end up using. Or you,
Yeah.
but again, like the best marketing strategies for stuff like that is also, if you have like identified like a GitHub issue, just like post under there, like I said, or like a forum thread, you post under there. There are like a lot of like Reddits that are just like really open to like this like r/side project, I feel like, where there are like
Mm-hmm.
a ton of like really like helpful people. If you like post something there, like, hey, I made this. Uh, you want to try it
Yeah.
out? Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about what you're saying, in to me, is that makes perfect sense. I'm like, oh yeah, totally. But now I'm thinking back to like when I was new to all this, and that's not what I thought marketing was. Like I think I maybe it's similar to you. You're like, oh, how do I market something? I put
Yeah.
it on YouTube, right? I feel like that's what a lot of people think with marketing. They're like, oh, how do I market something? I make an ad for it and put it on, Google search, or I, make some viral whatever, right? Like, isn't that kind of like if you really think back to before you learned this stuff, that's kind of our imagination of what marketing is, right? Is like,
Yeah.
I need to do some wild thing, or I need to find some like, and that can work, obviously, like people have done stuff like that. But I think what you're saying is a lot more effective and a lot cheaper, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, it's just about like, again, like finding like people that like care about what you build, like finding those
Yeah, yeah,
communities.
that's a really good way of saying it. Yeah, like to me, that's also my experience. Is like, instead of, maybe what we're saying is, instead of thinking of it as marketing in the like Coca-Cola sense or whatever, you're thinking of marketing as, how do I find somebody that this solves a problem for, and
Yeah.
just talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something that took me way too long to learn. Like, and I feel like it's like hard, because before you're in this space, that's the type of marketing we feel like we're exposed to, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I don't know if you have any more thoughts on like how, how that plays out, but like, yeah, I don't know. To me, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
It's just also like if you start out with that, it's like scary to just talk to random people and like tell them about your idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, like people are nice, like in general. Like 90% of the people like you will out, especially in like those like smaller communities,
Mm-hmm.
like they're like generally like very open to help you and like to talk to you and to like even guide you through like specific stuff. So yeah, just
Yeah.
overcoming that fear of like talking to people. But,
Yeah, I think, and yeah, I'd be interested on your opinion on this too. But the sort of approach I've learned with that, in like talking to people in these smaller communities, is coming at it with a sort of humble attitude of like, hey, I'm just curious, like, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like my natural tendency is to be like, I made this and it's awesome and it's going to solve their problems. And, if people don't respond to it like, wow, this is the best thing since sliced bread, it kind of feels bad, And so
Yeah.
I've sort of developed this thing where it's like, okay, no, these are just like regular people. I need to come into this being like, oh yeah, I probably didn't get it all completely right, and that's fine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also it's also have to learn, like talking to like potential like users, or just like having like valuable like user interviews, or like valuable conversations with people about your idea. It's also like a very like a skill you have to develop over time, essentially. But yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe as we start to wrap this up here, one other thing I was curious about is we've talked a lot about, okay, let's talk to users, let's hear what people say. I think there's another aspect of this that can throw you off when you're building something. And that is, I find that people aren't always that great at communicating what they actually want. So I've run into situations where I've actually basically countless situations where what people really say is not really what they want. It's just what comes to mind immediately or whatever. I'm curious if that's your experience, and if it is, because I'm assuming it is, if you've developed any techniques to figure out like, okay, I have 10 people telling me it should do this, but I think like what they're really telling me is this.
I feel like the most like valuable approach or like tactic to get around that is to not ask for solutions, because usually like people are like, oh, I don't know, like they have like a particular solution in mind for something that like could improve their workflow. But usually it's like that like improvement is like a side effect of like something else that's broken, and there's like a elegant or like better actual solution to solve that. So instead of like trying to or like directly ask like, what can I build for you, it's more like, what do you like struggle with, and like why is that an issue, like why do you want to have like that particular thing built, and then get like a more zoomed out view, like a more abstract view of the actual issue, and then see how you can solve that.
Yeah. I feel like you've developed a lot of skills here, because I feel like my initial instinct was exactly what you were saying not to do, which is like ask for, sort of drive at solutions like, hey, what do you want this to do or whatever, right?
There's this really interesting like small like book about like how to do user interviews correctly, which I found very valuable. It's called the Mom Test. I don't know if you like know about that one, but I can highly recommend
what's it called? Can you like say it?
It's called the Mom Test.
I'm not sure. I don't think I've heard of it. I'll get that from you and include it in the description for other people to look up. I want to check it out. So is this what does this tell you? Why should we check it out?
Oh, it's essentially like it's like it tells you like what to avoid, and gives you like concrete example of like how to actually find out problems like people are having, how to like use the like feedback you've gathered through user interviews, and like how to do them correctly. Essentially, it's like a great resource, especially if you like struggle with that in the beginning. It's probably like the most influential book I've read on like user interviews. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I actually haven't heard of that one, so I'm very interested to check it out. Yeah, I feel like that is definitely tied into though like starting something, and even if you like almost maybe what I'm getting at is the way you frame things when you go to communities or places to present what you've built. The way you frame it can have a big impact on how people receive it and the feedback that they give. Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And so, and I bring that up again because I feel like it can be something that can be very discouraging if you like go there and you're like, oh, does this solve all your problems? And people are just like, no, like maybe it does solve their problems. You just didn't ask it right, It sounds to me like a lot of what we've discussed is building a skill set of starting and executing on things at the early stage. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other like advice or ideas on how to do that when you don't have that experience? Like, would you suggest somebody just like builds one new project and launches it every day? Or I don't know if you have any other ideas on how somebody that hasn't done this before could start building up that skill set.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like probably like it's a bit unrealistic to launch something every single day, but yeah, like set yourself like a deadline of like 1 week, launch something, actually like put effort into like putting it out there, finding communities, posting in that. If that doesn't end up working out, really make yourself think about like why it didn't work out. Also, like there are like a lot of resources out there to like kind of help you a bit, like analyzing what you did wrong and like how you could do better. Like just doing like a bit of like reading up also on like the marketing side of things, not just building it, doing one post, like, oh, nobody looked at it, so like it must be bad, and like continuing on, like actually like putting effort into trying to find like people that care about it, and then yeah, just doing that over and over and over again, and like you'll get it after like a few attempts. So yeah,
like try it over and over again. But feel like what I'm hearing you say is try different things too.
Yeah.
Like I tried this, people didn't seem interested. Maybe I will try something else. But if you're trying something else, maybe you also present it different, frame it different, do some research in between about how to, market it, or, use it as a learning opportunity, maybe beyond just the experience of building it. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it has been fantastic having you on the React Show. And I'm super excited for MimeType, and sounds like a really thrilling day you have coming up for you. And sort of to tie off this whole thing, I want to ask you, like, how do you feel about MimeType? Are you nervous? Do you got butterflies in your stomach, or are you just like, nah, I know we got this thing in the bank?
I mean, like, of course, like I feel a bit nervous. It's like it's always feeling like launching something.
Yeah.
At least, yeah, it's just the waitlist launch, so it's fine. But we have like good like early feedback.
Yeah.
So I feel pretty confident right now that we found something valuable. You just have to like just figure out like where to go from here, like expand that, and yeah. So I'm excited, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. I'm so excited for you, and I just want to thank you once again for joining us on the React Show. And before we sign off, is there any last words you have for anyone? Last advice, if there's something you want people to check out, if it's MimeType, whatever that might be.
I mean, yeah, like if you listen to it, go to like meier.sh, listen, sign up to waitlist, or maybe like once you listen to it, the app is actually launched. Try it out. Be curious to also like hear your feedback. So yeah, you can find my you can just look up you can just look up MimeType. You'll find my contact somewhere on there. And yeah, and thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah, and I will absolutely link all of this in the description, or whatever it's called on whatever platform you listen or watch this on. So yeah, if you're interested, I definitely recommend checking out MimeType. I'm excited to go check it out. And yeah, thank you once again, and thank you all for joining us. And like always, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.